the third meeting, a colleague from CBD Secretariat, the Secretary of the SBI 3 meeting, experts, organizations, youth, and colleagues from CBD Secretariat, CARICOM Secretariat, as well as from UNEP. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to this Caribbean regional briefing meeting in preparation for the CBD's subsidiary body on implementation, the third meeting, where an informal session is to begin on Monday next week on the 8th of March 2021. My name is Balakrishna Pisupati. I work at UNEP Law Division, focusing on issues of international environmental governance, and also lead the program for Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific regions under what is called the ACP MEAs project, which is in its third phase, supported by European Union in collaboration with the Organization of Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific States. The ACP MEAs program is currently being implemented in all the member states of the Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific regions, and is coordinated by UNEP with a number of partners, including CARICOM Secretariat, that coordinates actions within the Caribbean region. The focus of this program is to enhance enforcement and compliance to multilateral environmental agreements that belong to biodiversity, chemicals, waste, and the pollution clusters. In addition, the program also focuses on issues of ocean governance, where we collaborate with regional seas programs. A third component of this program focuses on issues of agriculture and biodiversity, and that is being implemented by colleagues from the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. We certainly welcome this opportunity to join you all in this virtual session. As indicated in the briefing notes provided to you all prior to this session, the intention of organizing this session is to provide yet another opportunity for countries and stakeholders in the Caribbean region to come together and discuss key issues that will form the core of forthcoming CBD SBI 3 meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all here that 2021 is considered as a super year for nature, and we within this group have an immediate responsibility to shape the post-2020 global biodiversity framework with its goals and targets and implementation plans. In doing so, we recognize the need of contributions from each and every party to the convention, however small or big they are. As we convene here, we realize that we have close to 17 years of experience discussing similar frameworks since we started setting ourselves achieving the biodiversity targets since 2002, when the parties adopted the 2010 global biodiversity targets, subsequently strengthened the same in 2010 through the 2020 Aichi biodiversity targets. However, the current post-2020 global biodiversity framework discussions are progressing with more opportunities as well as challenges to stop the loss of biodiversity and ecosystems that is threatening our very basic survival. During this briefing session, we are very grateful and honored to have the guidance of the chair of SBI 3 meeting, Ms. Charlotta Sökqvist from Sweden, in understanding the focus and intended outcomes of the informal session of SBI 3. To facilitate informed participation of delegates at this meeting and subsequently during the SBI 3 informal session, UNEP has prepared a number of agenda briefs based on the documentation made available by the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we are very grateful to the Secretariat for providing the background information. These briefs are intended to have a quick overview of issues and facilitate discussions during this meeting and subsequently. During this session, we will also hear from the Bureau member of the CBD Corp representing BRULAC, as well as the Secretary of the SBI 3 meeting. This is followed by a brief presentation from UNEP, elaborating the elements of issues that are intended for discussion at SBI 3. We will then open the floor for discussion, question and answers. We hope that this session will be a precursor for more interactions within the region and also among the regions, and help further strengthen the interests and input from the Caribbean countries into the convention processes, including finalization and adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. May I now request the Bureau member from the region, Ms. Helena Brown, to provide some remarks, please. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Helena.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Yes, okay.
Yes, Helena, we can hear you clearly.
Greetings all. Greetings to the SBI Chair, Charlotta. Thank you for coming, and the Secretariat, our UNEP representative, Mr. Dr. Balakrishna, our CARICOM Secretariat, Amrika Tisha Shune, and all our national focal points here, our colleagues. I appreciate this opportunity to give these remarks. Thank you to UNEP and CARICOM for providing this space where we, from the Caribbean sub-region, are able to come together to discuss important issues that will be raised at the upcoming formal SBI 3 meetings next week. Thank you especially to our rep from UNEP, Dr. Balakrishna, for preparing the 6-page briefing document and the key issues on the major agenda items. As always, conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in small island developing states is essential for life. As you're aware, SIDS are extremely vulnerable to climate change, economic effects of pandemics such as the COVID-19 and so many others. We actually depend on robust biodiversity within our ecosystems for our survival. We have no plan B. There's nowhere to evacuate to. We have what we have. And so therefore, the importance of reducing biodiversity loss is essential to us. Having a strong SIDS-relevant post-2020 global biodiversity framework is important to overall biodiversity goals. The means of implementation of our biodiversity programs for small island developing states is at the forefront of our minds. In the past decade, many of us, due to the late availability of funding, were only able to complete the update of our NBSAPs so that we're in line by the global IG biodiversity targets by the middle or latter half of the decade, giving us a very short time for implementation. And in many cases, it was only those targets that received special attention due to national or regional projects that were at least on their way to being reached. Therefore, when we speak on an international stage, it's important to emphasize the need for the means of implementation for vulnerable SIDS receive special attention. When we think of means of implementation, we think resource mobilization, financial mechanisms, but also capacity building is important. But capacity building for small island developing states is somewhat a bit different from other countries. Remember, we have very few people, staff members in our departments of environment. So building their capacity to do 40 tasks is not sustainable. We have to find other ways to build capacity, engage our NGOs and our community groups. It's important to engage them and maybe build their capacity, because we all have to play a part in reducing and the responsibility of reducing biodiversity loss. And it's only in that way, in that shared way where we share it among all parties, all inhabitants of our land masses, that we have a chance of putting biodiversity on the road to recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Helena. Actually, I should have invited our partner and co-organize this event, the CARICOM Secretary, Ms. Amrika Singh. Ms. Amrika, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Bala. That's fine. CARICOM usually likes to speak after its member states. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. A special Caribbean welcome to those of you who are in other parts of the world, the chair of SBI. Good morning to CARICOM member states, special bienvenidos to representatives from the DR and Cuba. to our regional institutions who are online. I see Cardi is online, as well as all the other stakeholders who have joined this morning's session. Let me welcome you on behalf of the CARICOM Secretariat, which is the host of the ACP MEAs Phase 3 Project Hub, ably led by Tisha Jean-Baptiste and Shanae Samuels. What we have been trying to do with the support of the project is build some momentum for the region as we aim to articulate the new global biodiversity framework. For those of you who have heard me speak in other fora, you know that we place a lot of importance on this framework. We view it as it's going to be one of our key documents, our key guidance strategies, together with the other strategies that we use to guide the region's sustainable development, namely the SDGs, the Samoa Pathway, the Sendai Framework, the Paris Agreement. It is our belief that the Global Biodiversity Framework will take its place as one of the key strategies guiding international development. And to that end, we have been trying to build momentum in the region to help our member states participate effectively in the discussions. Many of you will know of the webinar series that we held last year. We had a 5-part webinar series focusing on areas within the framework that were of key importance to the region. And this is the second briefing that we have organized in collaboration with our partners, UNEP, to keep this sort of momentum going. Our able rep on the Subster, Helena, has been working with both the CARICOM Secretariat and the OECS Commission to come up with strategies and ways through which we can increase the political momentum as we get closer to the COP. And these are all things that we're going to do, that we're happy to do as the CARICOM Secretariat, to ensure that the voices of Caribbean SIDS are well reflected in the ongoing negotiations. So just to quickly, I think Bala and Helena said everything really well. It is hoped that this session this morning will give you an overview. We know as negotiators, especially to the negotiators, we know how busy you are, and sometimes it helps to have the issues presented in a concise and easily understandable way to guide, to help with your preparations. So it is hoped that this will serve that purpose this morning. We're extremely glad that with the funding from the EU and the facilitation of UNEP, that under this project we can produce briefs that would help or would be able to guide our participants in the African, Caribbean, and Pacific states to participate in these various fora. And of course, we recognize that for this region, the means of implementation and therefore the SBI is critically important. We're hoping that with this session, it will help focus preparations to think about the cross-cutting issues and the strategic framework for implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. To, of course, see what worked for us in the past and how us as a region of SIDS, what is necessary for us to effectively participate in the post-2020 GBF. To look at the usual, as Helena mentioned, the issues of capacity building and making sure that capacity building, resource mobilization, financing, that we as small island states participate fully in these discussions so that we can benefit fully from the rollout of the post-2020 GBF. And finally, it is hoped that this sort of discussion will crystallize thinking around the roles, the commitments, and actions needed by our member states in terms of the reporting requirements that will emerge, and how we're going to utilize our NBSAPs in planning and implementation going forward, and of course the reporting requirements and how we can achieve synergies to ensure that the reporting burden on member states is not significant. So that is it from our perspective. We're looking forward to this morning's session. And again, let me welcome you. I wish I could show you the Caribbean sun, but it's a very nice day in Georgetown today, and I hope we have a very good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amrita. And certainly we do value the partnership, the collaboration with CARICOM Secretariat, and a very special thanks to you, colleague Desha, and also Shune for helping us pull the entire event together, and also all the background work that you actually have put in terms of realizing this particular event today. So certainly thank you very much in terms of your support and help. And at this point, may I invite the chair of SBI 3, Charlotte Sokvist, for her remarks, please. Charlotte, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished participants, and greetings to you all. And thank you so much for inviting me to this briefing today and giving me this opportunity to give a few remarks on the preparations of the informal virtual meeting that will start the 8th of March. And just to repeat, maybe as a background again, as you know, subsidiary body for implementation has 4 functions and core areas that consist of review of progress of implementation, strategic actions to enhance implementation, strengthening means of implementation, and operational conventions and the protocols. And the mandate for the discussion as this SBI 3 are to be found at several COP and COP-MOP decisions, and some linked very clearly to the development of a post-2020 process. You have, of course, as you may know, that you have the decisions on resource mobilization, capacity building, cooperation, mainstream, also, of course, a post-2020 decision. So, and there are also several COP-MOP decisions that give a specific mandate that now has given, will be discussed during this SBI 3 meeting. It is important to keep in mind that the overall strategic objective of SBI 3 is to preparing advice to the co-chairs and working group of post-2020, also to give recommendations to COP15 on key mechanisms required for operationalization and implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, but also to give recommendations on other decisions that will be taken at COP15 and COP-MOPs. SBI 3 needs to conclude this work in order to give guidance to the co-chairs of post-2020 process. It is needed for them to develop next draft, the first draft of a global biodiversity framework, prior to the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group. And I will especially highlight the discussions that will take place under agenda item 6 on resource mobilization, 7 capacity building, 9 on enhanced implementation, and 11 on mainstreaming, even if other agenda items, as I think many of you already know, are likely to include elements for the consideration by the co-chairs. Because of postponement of the meetings, there have been several informal webinars already related to different SBI agenda items, and the purpose of those informal webinars organized by the Secretariat has been to assist parties and observers to be familiar with the documentation of SBI. And if you have not participated yet, you can also find recordings I think from almost all webinars at the CBT webpage, it could be helpful if for those who are not taking part in those webinars, if you're interested in some specific agenda item. My hope is that this informal SBI meeting will contribute to maintain momentum in the process. I think that will maybe be the most important thing. And it will include intervention on the pre-session documents for the agenda items for SBI. But it is an informal meeting. It's not a negotiation meeting, and we will follow the same procedures as was done in informal SAPSTA last week. There will be in a procedure report. Statements will be uploaded and can be seen on the web page, and I do really hope that you all will actively contribute with your views in this and take the opportunity for this first informal discussion on the pre-session documents, because I think we all can learn very much to hear the views of all different parties and observers, so we all will be better prepared for the formal meeting whenever it will take place. So I think I will stop here, and maybe if I can ask the special secretary for a meeting, Jyoti Philippe from the CBT Secretariat, if you can add something more about the logistical aspects of the meeting. So Jyoti, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks,
Thank you,
Charlotte.
Jyoti, please.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you, everyone, for being here today and to help us provide you a little bit of a briefing on what is expected from the SBI, as Charlotte has just done, but also on some logistical aspects of the meeting that might help you. So as you know, we have been trying a new platform called Interactio for this particular set of online meetings. We first debuted this in September. We then had another session in December, and now we will be using it also for the informal session of SBI, as we did for SAPSTA. So we're hoping it's a step-by-step process that people are going to get familiar with the platform and find it easy to use. I understand that there was a training session on this morning at 6:30 Montreal time, and there will be a second training 6:30 p.m. Montreal time today. The details of the training are in the priority pass that you would have received. One of the things that we really want to emphasize here is that we understand that sometimes there are technical difficulties in joining when you are giving your intervention. So it might be appropriate if you could have backups, especially in terms of regional statements, so that if you are not able to if the person assigned to make a regional statement is unable to do so, somebody else can pick up and make the
Jyoti, you're muted. We lost you for a few seconds.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, please. We lost you for a few seconds.
Bala, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead, Jyoti.
Hi.
Yes, can hear you. Go ahead.
Short deadline, so we passed. So we're not setting another hard, fast deadline.
Hi, can you hear me?
Jyoti,
Hello.
yes, can hear you. Can hear you. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me,
we can
Bala?
hear you. Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. So then I'll continue. Apologies for that. So the other part that I wanted to talk about is the flow of statements that we're going to have after each agenda item has been introduced by the Secretariat. We will open the floor for regional statements first, then we will open it for parties, followed by major groups and then observers. As you may have realized last week during Substat, that because there's such a high interest in biodiversity, whereas we are able to take the statements of each and every party, we may not be able to take statements from all observers that raise their hand. So you might hear some feedback on that. We also have a new system, a new app, which is also there in your priority pass to upload statements. And this is something that you may be able to, that will be able to help you upload the statements. As I said, this informal session of SBI is to maintain momentum, to help people get used to the platform, and as Charlotta said, to start hearing party views so that we are able to start developing, or the co-chairs of the post-2020 process are able to start developing the first draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework for negotiations at the third meeting of the open-ended working group on post-2020 sometime later this year. Thank you, and over. And apologies for the technical issues. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks a lot to both Charlotta and Jyoti. I think that's very, very clear, and thank you very much for the updates. It's quite helpful, and even though several of us participate in these events, it's always good to know not just the choreography, but also the technical details of how these things are organized and being held. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much for your support and interest in this particular event. I also recognize the presence of Honorable Mr. Walter Robin, the Deputy Premier from Bermuda. Welcome, Mr. Walter Robin. Thank you very much for joining, and certainly your presence is quite encouraging. So,
thank you.
That,
thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. So I'll then go to a short presentation to basically give you an overview of the different agenda items that are going to be discussed during the SBI 3 meeting. And as the chair mentioned, it's inputs from the parties are welcome. So this presentation is based on a synthesis of both the formal documents for SBI 3, as well as several information documents that were kindly prepared and made available by colleagues from the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So the intent of this presentation is to give you a very quick overview of the issues so that it can help us have a facilitated discussion after the presentation. And I'm very happy to note that our Bureau member from the region, Ms. Helena, has kindly agreed to facilitate the discussions and question and answer session after the presentation is done. So I request my colleague Ladu to help me with the slides. Ladu, can I have the next slide, please? And of course, as mentioned by the chair, the Bureau member, and also Jyoti, we actually are going to be discussing several of the issues in continuation of the discussions that we have been having in preparation for adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. But of course, it's also useful for us to have a very quick view of the starting point. Certainly, we have had, as I mentioned in my previous remarks, biodiversity goals and targets that the countries and all of us have set for ourselves in 2000. And certainly every time we are discussing a new set of targets and a new set of goals, we actually have more opportunities to ensure that the work gets better and we are able to achieve what we want to achieve. But at the same time, we also continue to face several challenges. And for those of us who actually have been reviewing the progress of implementation of the current set of targets, the Aichi biodiversity targets, we do recognize that the overall achieving the current targets, we definitely seem to have not progressed to the extent that we wished. So collectively, there are definitely certain failures, but we are also happy that individually we have also succeeded, whether it is related to the extent of notifying the protected areas or the entry into force of the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing, the way we wanted to update and review the national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and several of them are certainly successes. So we have to be happy in terms of where we have succeeded, but collectively we still are struggling to ensure that the level of failure is as minimal as possible as we move forward, not only agreeing to the targets and goals in the post-2020 framework, but also implementing them so that when we meet in 2030, we can certainly say that we did a better job from where we started. And of course, in the period, we also have learned a lot of lessons, whether they are related to implementation, whether they are related to collaborations, whether they are related to issues of technology transfer and cooperation, cross-cutting issues, including issues like traditional knowledge and others. But we also continue to face several challenges that include the need for capacity, the need for better cooperation and synergies among the work that we're doing, the need for additional financial resources to ensure that the actions happen in time, and also redefining as and when we go in terms of the indicators that are required for us to look at how do we report and how do we assess the progress we are making individually and collectively in terms of realizing the global biodiversity goals. And certainly new opportunities do exist from where we started, both in terms of technology, both in terms of science that is informing a lot of our actions as and when we are defining the elements of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Can I have the next slide, Radu? Yeah, so the key agenda items for the informal meeting, but also the SBI 3 meeting, are those that are presented to you. Agenda item 3 that looks at review of progress in the implementation of the convention and the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020. There will also be a discussion, assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. We'll also have an agenda item that looks at the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and all of us are aware of the discussions we have had in the informal SBSTA meeting, SBSTA 24 meeting that was organized by the Secretariat a few days ago. So there'll be continuation of discussions on that, but more focusing on the issue of implementation. Agenda item number 6, focusing on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism to the convention, the Global Environment Facility. We'll also be having a focused discussion on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication, all as a package. Looking at the issue of cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives, learning from what's happening in terms of enhanced cooperation among the conventions and initiatives and organizations. We'll also be looking at mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review, an important means for looking at implementing the post-2020 framework as well. There'll also be discussion on review of effectiveness of processes under the convention and its protocols. That includes the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, the supplementary protocol on liability and redress, as well as the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. There'll be discussion, which, as many of you have known, that mainstreaming of biodiversity will be a regular agenda item across most of the discussions that we will have, including at SBI 3 as well as at COP15. So there will be focus on looking at mainstreaming biodiversity within and across sectors and other strategic actions to enhance implementation. We'll also discuss specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4 of the Nagoya Protocol, as well as dealing with the global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, as many of you know, covered under Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol. So certainly a very, very comprehensive agenda, and certainly a number of busy days as and when we begin the discussions on Monday next week. Can I have the next slide? So what I'd like to do is to very quickly take you through not all, but a few of those agenda items, just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the kinds of issues that are going to be discussed, as well as a few issues for consideration for our discussion during this particular meeting. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as we all realize and mentioned both by the chair and the secretary, will discuss the support and review of implementation, enabling conditions for such implementation. It also will discuss the responsibility and transparency, as well as outreach and awareness actions related to the Global Biodiversity Framework. It will consider elements of the framework and its implementation that covers the issues both within the convention and its protocols. Consider all relevant cross-cutting issues such as resource mobilization, financial mechanism, capacity building, scientific and technical cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, communication, and as well as other topics. But most importantly, it will also discuss and consider the gender action plan, which has been drafted by the Secretariat, which will also be a key element in terms of not only adopting the post-2020 framework, but also its implementation. So in relation to some of these agenda items, the key considerations could essentially be that list is not comprehensive. These are just suggestive points for our discussion during this meeting, is to assess the long-term strategic framework implementing post-2020 framework, which definitely will be on the table. Looking at reviewing and suggesting the suggested options on using cross-cutting issues to the global biodiversity framework. To also important to discuss and the implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, as well as the supplementary protocol on liability and redress, as well as focus on capacity building and suggested format for the 5th national report, and discuss issues related to implementation of the Nagoya Protocol on access to genetic resources and benefit sharing. The next slide. Resource mobilization and financial mechanism will be a very, very important element discussion as countries are preparing for SBI 3, but also to take forward the discussions both at the working group meeting as well as during COP15, where the SBI 3 would discuss review the contributions of the Global Environment Facility, which is the financial mechanism to the convention, discuss the outputs of a panel of experts on issues related to development of resource mobilization, prepare proposals for 4-year program priorities for GEF 8. Then the GEF 8 cycle is expected to begin from July 2022 and end in June 2026. SBI will also consider a compilation of estimated funding and investment needs submitted by relevant necessary and available for implementation of the convention, which is also related to the experts report as well. It will also review the terms of reference for the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. Next, Vladimir. And for those of you who actually have already looked at the background documentation, you would recognize that we already have some numbers in front of us with respect to the finances that are required as and when we move forward for implementing the post-2020 framework, where we are looking at a lower range of estimate that range from $103 billion to $178, and a higher estimate that ranges from $613 billion to $895 billion annually. That's the kind of an expectation. That's the kind of a projection that has been provided to us. In terms of this agenda item, some of the issues that parties and this meeting could consider having in mind is to look at the costs of inaction, because a lot of time the discussion is on action, but it is also important to look at the cost of inaction, to discuss the proposals for financing implementation, such as establishment of a biodiversity fund, which was suggested by the ministerial meeting from the Africa region, the AMSEN, and supported by the Africa region. Identify options for a national biodiversity finance plan, and also developing a reporting framework for resource mobilization and related capacity building. So those are some of the issues that are relevant to the discussions at SBI 3 on resource mobilization and financing mechanism. The next slide. In terms of capacity building, technical scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication, as many of you know, these are cross-cutting issues that are relevant across different targets and the goals of the global biodiversity framework. But also sometimes it's a challenge to have very, very clear and focused discussion on some of these because they are, and to an extent, they are also at sometimes in terms of implementation effectiveness of making use of some of these kinds of opportunities for realizing the implementation goals. SBI 3 would consider a draft long-term strategic framework of capacity building beyond 2020. It will discuss initial compilation of relevant institutional arrangements and networks for technical and scientific cooperation relating to different thematic topics. It will review the draft elements of a knowledge management component of the post-2020 framework, as well as discuss implementation of the framework for a global communication strategy and develop themes and background material for post-2020 framework that can be used by different stakeholder groups who actually are committed to implementing the framework as and when it gets adopted. The key considerations within this agenda include the elaborations for a global capacity building strategy, which is very important for countries to have a focus on. Review the national conditions and needs for communication. Processes that are needed to further support the development of the biodiversity information and knowledge that includes traditional knowledge issues, and also further elaboration of a technology transfer mechanism, including establishment of an institutional framework. So certainly some of these things are considered and being discussed for a long time. It will continue to be discussed into the future, but it is time for countries to also assess on how these cross-cutting issues would help us realize and implement the post-2020 framework as well. The next slide. There'll be discussion on cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives, and this is something which is very important because there is no one organization who will be able to facilitate achieving the goals and targets. So certainly there is a need for better coordination and cooperation among conventions, where SBI will consider cooperation, including a progress report of an informal advisory group. It will review the reports of the consultation workshops that were held among and within the biodiversity related conventions and the Rio conventions on the post-2020 framework. It will discuss issues on synergies among conventions, review the means of enhancing coherence and synergies of reporting systems and the related multilateral environmental agreements, discuss an accountability framework that enables coordination among assessments, indicators, and national reporting under various conventions, consider the potential for harmonization of data management and reporting, and lastly, and very importantly, discuss relevant involvement of non-party stakeholders. So this is now getting a lot more of attention and resonance, and probably some of you or many of you would have realized that this is a part of the discussion under a CBD supported special event that was organized under the aegis of the UN Environment Assembly that was held a couple of weeks ago. The key considerations in relation to this agenda would be looking at the national and or regional experiences of implementing actions in achieving the biodiversity targets, because as I mentioned, all parties have already had significant experience of actions related to implementing the targets. The biodiversity targets that were adopted in 2010. So it is very important to look back and see what worked and what did not work as and when we move forward to finalizing the implementation plan for the future targets, the global biodiversity framework that is under discussion. It also is important to consider the national circumstances and make specific recommendations to both the open working group, the third meeting of the group meeting, as well as COP15 on making synergies and cooperation work on the ground. It's just not institutional cooperation at the level of secretariats, but it's also cooperation that happens on the ground. It also will be prudent to consider NBSAPs and the national reports that can be better adapted to deal with the cooperation. Countries have already updated and revised the NBSAPs, have significant experience of working on national reports already. So certainly it's time for countries to also look at how they'll be using the NBSAPs and the national reporting frameworks to support the implementation of the biodiversity framework. The next slide. Mechanisms for reporting and assessment and review of implementation. The key issues would be considering and testing a party-led review process, including through an open-ended forum, and to develop guidance on voluntary delivery of review reports. Assess and develop options for enhancing the review mechanisms with a view of strengthening implementation, and identified possible modalities for applying approaches to enhance review of implementation as part of the process for developing the post-2020 framework. The key considerations could be assessing the roles, commitments, and actions related to the framework regarding reporting by other UN conventions, business establishments, and other stakeholders, the role of NBSAP in planning and implementation, instruments in communicating national commitments, and also learning from the revision of NBSAPs in undertaking new revisions in response to the new framework that will be adopted at COP15. It's also prudent to look at means of synergies in terms of reporting, the periodicity of reports, the need for internal reports, and support that is required to develop such reports, including on use of indicators, and also discuss the role and relevance of reports such as the Global Biodiversity Outlook reports, the IPBES reports, so that we can learn in terms of the processes, but also learn from other voluntary peer review processes as well. The next slide. Ladu, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. Mainstreaming biodiversity within and across sectors. As I mentioned, this is going to be a standing agenda item in all the forthcoming COPs. Looking at inter alia, the outcomes of the discussions under the informal advisory group established during the CBD COP14 meeting that looked at development of proposal for long-term approach to mainstreaming biodiversity, including on ways to integrate mainstreaming adequately within the post-2020 framework and the implementation plan. And the key considerations that parties could focus on will be to look at the need to review the proposals on mainstreaming using the long-term approaches across sectors, review past and ongoing efforts of mainstreaming biodiversity across ministries and sectors, and identify some very specific targeted suggestions for the framework, understand and reflect on the national situations to implement components of mainstreaming as elaborated within the action plan that is accompanying the suggested long-term approach. That will be that is already presented as background documentation for SBI 3. The next slide, please, Ladu. And I think this, the next slide. Yeah, this will be the last slide in terms of the agenda items for SBI, the key agenda items, not all of them. Will be in focusing on the issue of access and benefit sharing, where the focus is on addressing or looking at the specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments in the context of Article 4 of the Nagoya Protocol, as well as discussions on the global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol, where we'll be considering a synthesis of information on how the specialized international instruments are addressed in their domestic measures and views on the potential criteria contained in the study, as well as developments in relevant international fora. The CBD Secretariat had put together a brilliant document in terms of collating the information related to that. So that will form the basis for discussions at SBI 3. The discussions will also be looking at details of a possible global benefit sharing mechanism, the potential criteria for a specialized international ABS instruments, and also consider the issues related to the benefit sharing mechanism with focus on the needs and options for modalities of implementation, including the global as an element of the global biodiversity framework. So in terms of the considerations, the focus could be on assessing the experiences and needs where the prior informed consent under the Nagoya Protocol is not possible to be obtained or cannot be granted, looking at elaboration of situations that warrant the need for having a global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism, debate the establishment of an ad hoc technical expert group, including focusing on the TORs for such a group, and elaborate on the strategic framework on capacity building and capacity development for implementation of the Nagoya Protocol. So those are some of the key agenda items. The next slide, Ladu. As I said that the presentation I made is not covering all and each and every agenda item for SBI, but these are some of the very critical ones in terms of the focus. So the suggestion or the kind of focus that perhaps we could have in the next 45 minutes to 1 hour that we have during this particular session would be to focus on those 4 key questions that I've projected. How can the region and countries within the region prioritize issues what inputs can the region and countries within the region provide to SBI3, what follow-up action would be needed intersessionally between SBI3, the Open Working Group, and COP15, what preparations are needed for implementation of the post-2020 framework once it is adopted. So let's sort of discuss some of these as and when we open the floor for discussions, question and answers. And I thank you very much for your attention. And as I mentioned, that these are some suggestive elements that we were able to pick up from the documentation available for SBI3, and they are by no means comprehensive or exhaustive or prescriptive in any form. So I'll now pass the floor to Ms. Helena Brown to facilitate the discussions and question and answers. And as my colleague Ladu let me mention, if you have any questions, please do raise your hand, or you can also type the question within the chat box. We'll be monitoring the questions, and we'll try to ensure that the discussions and the moderator can pick up some of those points to facilitate the discussion. Thank you very much, and over to you, Helena.
Thank you. Thank you for that precise presentation. And just to know that I've had at least one request for the presentation. So would it be available for all the participants?
Yes, actually,
yes.
The presentation is just an extract of the agenda brief that was
right. Yes.
But
yeah,
we'll also make it available.
Right. So so please also review your agenda briefs, which yes, he pulled out many of the salient points from the agenda briefs. So if you haven't received the agenda briefs, please send us a message, and we can send that to you right away, so you can have that there. So thank you. So to just kick off the ball rolling, any questions at this point? Anybody has any questions or concerns at this point? I'm not seeing any hands as yet, but okay, so then what would be, if you had to say, what would be the important agenda items for you at this point? I know for me, it's post-2020, all of them important. But I think for us, we would want, I think maybe post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, agenda item 6 on resource mobilization, agenda item 7 on capacity building, etc. Those to me are issues that we might want to speak about. Any takers? Anybody who has any concerns about these agenda items? Nobody has any. Okay. All right. So looking, okay, that's fine. So looking at, so let's take it from a different tact. Let's look at the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. What I have up on my screen, Dr. Balakrishna, is that you know, the things you wanted to look at regarding the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in terms of is how it's planned, how it's set up. How do people feel about how it's set up in terms of the long-term strategic framework for implementing it? Because if you look at your updated zero draft, you would see that yes, we have this 2050 vision, but then we have a 2030 mission, and to get there we have 4 goals or 4 milestones for the 2030 milestones, and it's set up like that, enabling us to get to the next decade and then to get to the next decade, all meanwhile having 20 targets under 3 groupings, which is looking at reducing threats to biodiversity, looking at meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, and also looking at tools and solutions for implementation and mainstreaming. Well, how do people feel about how it's set up? Are there any opinions? Is it something that you think that can work for you? This long-term strategic framework? Okay, so the folks of St. Lucia, how do you feel? Was there any concerns you had about it? Or did you think that it should been anybody from St. Lucia? Because I see both Janelle and I see both Gustav here. What were your concerns? Was the post-2020 biodiversity framework set up in a way that you think is achievable. Any takers from St. Lucia? No?
We are having one hand up from America.
Oh, there's one. Oh, Amrika, right. Yes, Amrika, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to take away from the question you put to the member states, but I'm just, and I see a lot of our member states are actually online. I'm not sure what the shyness is about, but what from where I sit, and this is not as a negotiator, I think in terms of going into this framework, I think a good place to start would have been some of the what do you call it? Some of the gaps and some of the constraints that we experience with the Aichi, achieving the Aichi targets. And as you know, we did for the region under the phase 2 of the ACP MEAs project, an assessment of how far we've gotten as a region with the achievement of the Aichi targets. So I think our entry point into this discussion should be from that that knowledge of what some of the constraints were, and trying to ensure that we carve some space to get them addressed, and they don't follow us into the new global biodiversity framework. There are a couple of pervasive issues, and this is well known to member states, but it's something that we, as a region, I think we have to prioritize, and that is the whole issue of data and information for monitoring and evaluation, reporting, etc. And I think a number of things are converging at the same time, which can only be to our benefit. That being that we have the SDGs, which are supposed to be accompanied by a data revolution. We have a decade of ocean science that started this year. We have the decade of ecosystem restoration, which is also taking place at the same time. So I think it's for us as a region to strategically align all these things in a way to see how we can address some of the persistent constraints which we had and which we have identified with Aichi as we go into developing and rolling out the new post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So that's just a reflection from my part, but I mean, the people who can speak more decisively on this are online, and those are our member states and practitioners. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Amrika. Well, I see we have other hands up. Great. So I'm going to actually ask Janelle from St. Lucia to go first, followed by Hannah from Belize, and then Jesus from Cuba. So Janelle, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, so just a quick comment and share the sentiment expressed by Amrita that we need to kind of take a step back and look at what we have accomplished and what some of the constraints were. And while I looked at a lot of the reports that said we had not met our objectives under the Aichi and our sustainable development goals and so on, but we, from doing assessment of what we have accomplished, we have laid the groundwork in terms of data and information that we would need to be able to protect or decide on actions for the conservation of some of our ecosystems. So over the last few years, while we may not have achieved the full goal, we have gotten spatial mapping plans and gotten the kind of information that we would need to be able to decide what we need to do and how we can go about it. So some progress has been made there. But I want to echo the sentiment that we do have a need for more data sharing and information and monitoring that.
Janelle, you disappeared. Hello? Okay, thank you for that, because I know that Gustav, also from St. Lucia, he had raised that point the last time when we had those 5 webinars. Okay, you're back now. Yes, I can hear you now. Hello?
I think I don't know if I'm still on, but
now you
just
are. Now you are.
Some of the agenda items speak directly to some of these constraints that we have experienced in terms of mainstreaming across ministries and agencies and getting the level of support that we need. So I will stop here for now.
Okay, thank you so much for that contribution. Now we go on to Hannah from Belize, followed by Jesus from Cuba. Hannah?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. You can go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helena. My main comment relates to the fact that the post-2020 framework closely it mirrors the 2010-2020 framework quite a bit. Notwithstanding the fact that those targets and indicators are pretty much the same, I feel like what we're not focusing on is whether we as nations have advanced in terms of our ability to respond to yet again these same targets that we have been missing, no? Now, it's not to say that we have not made great advancements, but as it relates to, for example, implementation in its entirety of our NBSAPs. For example, Belize, we assessed that our implementation of our NBSAP is at approximately 49%. Now, this is implementation as it relates to our national targets, not necessarily implementation in terms of alignment and reflection of the global targets. And so for me, I believe that our nations need to assess nationally what are those critical success factors required for truly implementing our ambition, our targets. Again, knowing that they contribute to the global ambitious target, but again, we must first and always work within our current reality and context. There are a number of critical factors that are still missing going into the post-2020 framework, such as the establishment of data management systems, knowledge management systems, the lack of financial mechanisms, the fact that we're going into a post-2020 framework where there is still a great work in terms of mainstreaming and cross-sector coordination and collaboration. And so I believe as the region, as we move into the post-20 framework, we must kind of take a pause and look at internal structures, processes, and systems that will allow us to improve implementation of the 2020 framework. I also believe that the framework lacks in the sense of providing guidelines for making operational these very ambitious and macro higher level targets that have been established. We all know that many of these targets are not achieved in 1 year or 2 year time span, that they require more work, and many times they require work that span even outside of the environmental sector. And so there needs to be some sort of consideration within the framework as it relates to how the regions, developed versus underdeveloped countries, operationalize these frameworks. No, I mean, in the pre-2020 framework, the CBD insisted that we adapt our targets adapt them from the global Aichi target. Yet still, when we were reporting, we were asked to report against the global targets. So we kind of need to determine, okay, which are we responding to, the global targets or what we've established at the national level? If that is the case, then that means the show in terms of achievement and success must also be reflected, and reporting must also be in line with what we've been directed to do, no? And the last one is that as it relates to within our countries, I believe there needs to be greater work in terms of commitments from the other sectors, the main drivers of biodiversity loss, to investing in biodiversity management and conservation. Many of us through the pandemic saw the fact that all primary revenue sources for protected areas has been pretty much brought to zero. And so what this requires is that we assess what level of commitment the sectors such as tourism, agriculture, energy, what level of commitment should be made towards biodiversity efforts at the national level. For example, most of our countries see that our industries and sectors are underpinned by natural resources, yet we don't advance beyond a 0.1 to 3% in terms of what is reinvested in biodiversity through our conservation divisions or ministries of environment. And so there must be some national effort, or it can be at the CORICOM heads of state level that our other sectors are mandated to identify ways in which they themselves can invest in biodiversity management and conservation at the national level. To me, that is the only way we will be able to improve in terms of implementation of our NBSAP targets.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That's greatly appreciated. A lot of food for thought there. Jesus, now from Cuba, you have the floor. Jesus?
Hi.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me good?
Good morning. We can hear you loud and clear. Go right ahead.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Elena, for allowing me this possibility to say something about the meeting that we will face next week. But now I'm worried, very worried again, because we have a lot of items to be discussed in this meeting, and we don't have enough time to do that. It is a big problem because we have here a lot of points that are not easy points, which includes many sub-items in every of them. Probably the better would be is to move the discussion of post-2020 to a specific informal session, because post-2020 framework is like a bus, no? In which every item should be on board. That means that it's important to continue the discussion of sub-item specific, like you can see in this agenda. For example, when you see in the agenda that the organizer puts only 105 minutes to discuss resource mobilization and the financial mechanism, is probably we have a really complicated situation, because it's a very important issue, probably the most important issue in the is SBI free. And regarding this point, many countries have different viewpoints. That it's necessary to listen everybody about what they understand about the role of the resource mobilization in the post-2020 framework. I think that 105 minutes is not enough time to do that. This is the main point. The second item that should be focused is regarding mechanism for reporting, assessment, and review of implementation, because this point is one of the new change, the change of the post-2020. So not only the change will be in order to link the different reports, but also to establish different ways to monitor the stage of the biodiversity in every country, taking into consideration what the government are doing in every case. So this is a new area of analysis. It's important for countries like us to understand better what other countries are proposing to include in the post-2020 framework. The last point that I want to refer is about these 2 points, the two items related with Nagoya Protocol. These points are not used in other subsidiary body. We were discussing about that, and I think that it's important to pay attention because in substance, no item specific related with Nagoya should be discussed, and then in SBI we can get this. It is very important to continue the discussion on Nagoya Protocol, and finally, good. It's very important to receive consideration about these important items that many countries don't want to move in the way that many developing countries want to develop. That's in general idea. Elena is the point that I want to mark for the meeting today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jesus. So we have anybody else, please feel free. I want to hear your opinion on the post 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. How it is now, how it's set up. Is it responsive to our SID's concerns, you know? Looking at the targets, is it possible? Can we implement them? So far we have heard from three parties where we have a concern about lack of data. Have we mainstreamed into other sectors? Has this been made mandatory? Have we looked at our knowledge management system? Have we looked at our ability to respond in the past, and what was the problem in the past? Can we correct it now? You know, I remember Jano spoke about spatial data, having more data available to actually make proper decisions, planning, moving forward. Where can we get this data? How can we get this data to help our implementation? Any other points of concern that people would like to raise? If not, I will move on to another agenda item, if that's acceptable. Looking at agenda item 3 on resource mobilization and financial mechanisms. I know Dr. Balakrishna, he had the areas of which we could consider in terms of the key lessons that we've had in the past about resource mobilization, and how we managed to achieve or not achieve the Aichi Global Biodiversity targets. Anybody want to speak about their experience in the last decade and how possibly we could maybe make a difference in the upcoming decade? Are there any ideas? Because, you know, money will not come out of the sky. We have to, yes, we depend on developing countries to help us with their share, but we have to figure out what financing mechanisms that we can garner to help ourselves. So I'm not seeing any hands as yet. So while you think about it, I will talk about my local experience in Antigua and Barbuda. Okay, so for the last decade, we were unable, we didn't get funding to help update our NBSAP until maybe 2014, 2015. So then we really only had 5 years of implementation after that. And then really it was the targets that we had projects on that were really focused, that helped us on the road to achieve these targets. But I remember Janet, or it could be Hannah, I don't remember who had said before that it's Hannah. We talk about we have our national biodiversity targets that we set, and we set them when we worked it out. We set it with all our stakeholders, all the agencies that are responsible for these areas. We set what was achievable for us. And they were not as, I guess, they were not extremely ambitious, but they did have a level of ambition because we are serious about our biodiversity, conservation, sustainable use. But they were not, I guess, maybe as ambitious as the global biodiversity targets, but we did what we thought that we could do to achieve them. So that was important for us in how we set our national targets. But now we have to look at what mistakes we did in the past and how we're going to move forward to the next decade. And is this do we have a way, a means of finding ways to move forward? I know that with us in Antigua and Barbuda, we've recently started our it's called Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund. It's an idea, it's a revolving fund that you know, where the idea is to be able to issue loans and to small, low interest loans to people to help build the resilience in their for climate change. So that's how we're starting now. So we're testing out on that. But then the next window, which we're testing this year, is looking at biodiversity projects, so that anybody who wants to do biodiversity in terms of conservation, sustainable use, they can get funding to help do that. So then it keeps, you know, funneling in to maintain this. So this is a possible way we're looking at financing, because we have to find ways to find financing, and going back again to a point raised earlier, it's mainstreaming it into different sectors, because people need to realize that whatever sector you're in, you are using the biodiversity around you, and you have to, it's not an unlimited resource. If it's not protected and taken care of and used sustainably, it cannot replenish, and it's, you know, so you have to invest in it. I don't remember what part of the world, but there was a yogurt company who was now investing back into the system, because they know that, hey, we will not continue to reap benefits unless we invest back into the system. So we now have to look at all the different sectors that are using biodiversity, our tourism sectors, our sectors of industry, what have you, figure out how we can get them to help invest in biodiversity, conservation, sustainable use, because they need to know that it's in their interest to do so, or there will be no future for their business. It'll be like running their business in the ground, which makes no business sense at all. Any countries there, anybody want to talk about their specific experience in this? Anybody? Any takers? I'm not seeing hands. I saw, okay, somebody opened their mic. Janelle, okay, I see that you opened your mic. Yes. You want to speak? No, you did not. Okay. All right. So I was so anxious, hoping somebody would want to speak, but nobody wants to speak. Okay. So nobody wants to say anything. Anybody could just give your experience in how you, in possible resource mobilization, any issues you had in the past decade, and possible ways of finding a solution to the future. Anybody does, again.
Hi, Helena.
Hannah, right. Yes, Belize.
I'm never shy. But my statement is as a response to your last comment, and mine as well, no, in the sense of the role of the other productive sectors and service providing sectors in terms of their contributions and investments in biodiversity management. But we must also not lose focus of the fact that protected areas and natural assets with quite a bit of investment and business potential as well. And so what that will entail is that we take on a more business and sustainable development approach to the management of these sites. There is quite a bit contained within these areas. You look at in terms of carbon credits, we look at it in terms of timber and non-timber resources. So we must also assist our nation in breaking that culture that sees protected areas as locking up the resources. The pandemic and the loss, for example, of tourism forced many of our communities to now turn back to these resources. And really and truly, we cannot continue to say no, but we must find alternative livelihoods which will empower our communities, and then in turn build that ownership and stewardship of the environment. So one thing that we're doing in Belize, for example, is we are currently developing a business and investment model for protected areas in Belize. We know that we have approximately, I could say now, 40% of our national territory under protection. Do we just lock it up and not have it generate revenues that can then be reinvested in management, but also contribute to community development and social programs, then definitely it means that there needs to be some shift in terms of our mindset and our approach to protected areas and biodiversity management. And so I think items like these are ways that we can operationalize the post-20 framework, especially on the strategic area relating to the protection. It is not just protection, it is also about sustainably managing and utilizing these resources, which we've established not because they look pretty alone, We conserve these resources because we recognize the need of sustainable management to ensure that they provide goods and services for our people, because we cannot have a hungry child and have a pretty forest, So we need to find ways as nations, with underdeveloped nations that we all are, in terms of allowing and facilitating the ability of these natural assets, these sites, in providing, the goods and services that our people really and truly deserve.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm just going to say that we will be contacting you, at least the person who runs our protected area project. We're going to be contacting you regarding the business and protected area mechanism. That sounds very interesting. I think we can learn a lot from you. Thank you so much for that. Does anybody else want to share their experiences regarding resource mobilization? Maybe, I don't know, Guyana, Trinidad, anybody care to just share their experience? Jamaica, Joni, I don't know if you want to share anything, or maybe Marina from the DR. Feel free to just raise your hand or just open your mic. I see Amrika is asking for the floor. You can have the floor, Amrika.
Yes, Chair, I'll take the floor. Well, since I'm not seeing anyone else, so I just wanted to thank Hannah for her intervention, and I should mention that the Prime Minister of Belize this week at the opening of a session, a 1 week session on the Green Climate Fund that they're having in the Caribbean, he did highlight PACT and the work that that Belize is doing with protected areas as a best case example. And just to say that going forward, the GCF has committed, and the Prime Ministers of Belize and the Prime Ministers of Belize and Barbados, who both addressed the opening on Monday, they did encourage the GCF to look critically and closely at being more responsive to the GCF in its construct does not respond to development, but the case it has to be, you have to make the climate change case, and the climate change case can be framed in adaptation or mitigation. However, the case was made over and over again that you cannot speak about climate change and SIDS and not link it to development. It goes hand in hand, and the same thing could be said for biodiversity and sustainable use of natural resources. So, the fact that we have this mechanism, the GCF, and we are, as a region, trying to improve our performance and our access and our the amount of projects we put through the pipeline, the proverbial pipeline in the GCF, I think is an unexplored opportunity, because the linkages between biodiversity and climate change, are there. They're well known, and it's something that we have to, it's a case that we have to be making more and more strongly at the national level. And I think one of the things that has to happen, in short order for us articulating the new GBF is a discussion at the national level between biodiversity focal points and your GCF rep, or the entity within your country that deals with the Green Climate Fund. So that is one thing. The second point is involvement of key economic sectors. We mentioned tourism, we mentioned forestry, there's agriculture, there's fisheries. There's a body of work that has been going on under it's called a high-level panel on sustainable ocean economies, and it's a panel headed by the government of Norway, and I can't remember who's the co-chair at this stage, forgive me, but the government of Jamaica sits on that panel, and there are a number of working groups and committees and involved in different aspects of sustainable ocean economies. And one of the areas that they focus on is how we will be financing activities in the quote unquote blue economy. And a number of lessons, key lessons came up, and of course the tourism sector came up, and there has to be, and this is I know I'm speaking to the converted, but just to reiterate, involving the business community or economic sectors in the work that we do has to be a meaningful partnership. There is a quotation that the youth use a lot that I like to adopt, which is nothing about us without us, and it could apply to any part of civil society. If we're looking at conservation of biological resources or natural resources or sustainable use, and we're looking at the resources on which the tourism industry is dependent, then it is incumbent on us to bring them to the table and see what are some of the meaningful things that we can do, either at the national or at the regional level, to get work done or projects mobilized in the sectors that, or in the areas that tourism are dependent on. So we're looking at coastal zone protection, nearshore water quality, those types of things. So I'm just throwing out some ideas. I mean, I would also love to hear, the national experiences that have been working. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Amrico. Okay, so doesn't see if you want to share there. Oh, Candace. Yes, great. Thank you, Candace from Trinidad and Tobago. Please, you can speak. The floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Hi, Candace.
Yes, well, you wanted to know about experiences with protected areas and incomes and things like that. So I'm not sure if you all knew that we had a improving forest and protected areas management project in Trinidad and Tobago recently concluded last year. It concluded after 5 years, approximately 20 million US project, and one of the project outcomes was to do a report on the socioeconomic study related to protected areas in Trinidad and Tobago. The last year, the project, a socioeconomic study, was undertaken and provided an overview of the multiple roles of forests and the welfare and livelihoods of the households living in the vicinity of the 6 pilot protected areas that we had in the project and the surrounding areas. This survey was undertaken with the assistance of our Central Statistical Office, so we ensured that the proper procedures and protocols were followed, so it can be replicated, and it was also used the support of a technical backstopping team of economists, which later prepared a final report on. If you would like, I can forward this final report. I can forward a link to the presentation that they have done. But I can just say, from one of the outcomes of the project, they found that that it was a total of revenue, that a yearly revenue from our protected areas, the 6 pilot protected areas that we had in the project, was approximately 18 million, almost 19 million TT dollars annually. But this was before COVID times. So we've had to go back to more rudimentary, because importation is becoming a little more difficult now. So persons will be returning to sustainable forestry and things like that. So that income probably is increasing. And we also have they also found that other various forms of they have both formal and informal employment generated, and that included, sorry, let me read it properly. The other various forms of formal and informal employment generated an average of total income which does not come from forest related products of total of $58 million. Yeah, so the this income is approximately 32.4% of annual income. You know, that from forest-related products, non-forest-related products, my mistake, sorry. So yes, so part of our project, we had a socioeconomic study done in 6 areas. So, you know, that is also of note. Yeah.
Thank you, Candice, and please share that link. Maybe you can post it in the chat and then we can share it. Thank you so much.
Yes. I can actually share also a link to a summary of our project, the project link, and it's one of its outputs, and the link to the report and the study done.
Thank you. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your contribution. All right. So let's just look also, we have just a few more minutes before I'm supposed to wrap up this conversation that we're having. Looking at agenda item 7, which looks at capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. What are people's thoughts on this in terms of capacity building and development? Any thoughts? I know that when I spoke about in my remarks earlier, this was one of my concerns. It's for small and developing states because I've been through this so many times and I've heard my colleagues in my neighboring islands and almost SIDS talk about it, that we get, you know, we get consultants, they come through, they build our capacity, so that box is checked and we have the capacity to do 40 things, but it's not sustainable. We're the one person and then, you know, it doesn't work. So we have to, in small and development states, figure out how capacity building can work for us. And maybe an idea would be to build the capacity not only of the staff, but of our NGOs, of our community groups, of the individuals. So you see, what I like about this whole new transformational change is that we're working on our communications, working on convincing the individual person about their involvement and how they can make a difference to reduce this biodiversity loss. So what are your thoughts? If I could get some here, even some NGOs, because I know that Canary is here, and you know, they're one of the NGOs that we like to work with to help us with our processes. How do you feel about capacity building and on a whole, in terms of getting everybody to participate, and then maybe other parties would like to give their experience with or their concerns regarding this particular agenda item, please. Anybody wants to say anything? Again, nobody. I'll let you think a bit on it. Right, Natalie from Canary. Yes. Thank you for raising your hand voluntarily.
So certainly, of course, a lot of our work is towards building the capacity of the NGOs, towards supporting specific actions that are taking place, for example, through the implementation of the biodiversity framework. So as far as possible, this is something we want to push. I mean, I feel I come to the meetings and I say the same things over and over again, but certainly as far as possible, there needs to be engagement. So, I mean, for this meeting and for the last one that we would have attended, I can't recall, I'm getting them a little mixed up. It's about how we get their input, civil society input into the different documents that are being developed, into the different recommendations. But then when we are actually executing a project, we're very adamant that it's never about just communicating information. It's about engaging. So for example, one of the things that we do, and many of you know different projects that we are currently working on as it pertains to community groups. And we've been talking, for example, about livelihoods. So we're building capacity through a number of different initiatives for community enterprises to develop their organizational capacity to be stronger as NGOs or as community-based enterprises, building their capacity in terms of ecosystem stewardship. How do they actually take care of a particular resource? Some of you would know of our project in Grenada, which is ecosystem valuation. So we're literally, I left a meeting where we're building the capacity of all stakeholders to understand ecosystem evaluation. Helena would know, for example, that we are working with an NGO in Antigua to build their capacity to carry out ecosystem valuation of protected area managements. So certainly in an arena where our government staff capacity is limited, in most cases, there simply are not enough bodies. We do need to think very carefully about how we use our NGOs to be able to fill that sort of human resource gap as much as possible. So of course, as far as possible, capacity building, and I've thrown out a few thematic areas, but certainly there are different areas we need to pull our NGOs more into the process. Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to, just a note, Candace from Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, she's put up the link. So if anybody's interested, they can go to the chat area and they can get the link, retrieve the link so you can get access to that information. Thank you, Natalie, for speaking about NGOs and what you were helping to do to build their capacity, because as you know, small island developing states, for Antigua and Barbuda, we're 108 square miles on Antigua, 62 on Barbuda. We have 100,000 people, if so many, and we need everybody to be part of the process, because we have great biodiversity, robust biodiversity, but we can't reverse the biodiversity loss on our own. As a government agency, we need all hands on deck to be part of this process. Does anybody else now have any burning areas of thought? Or, oh, Janelle, great, you raised your hand, great, thank you, you have the floor.
Hi, Helena. Just to respond to the question about capacity building and some of the steps that we have taken to kind of address the gaps that we have. When we do, like all the other countries, hire consultants or when we have projects, we hire consultants to come in, and we do a component on learning by doing. So it's a new thing that we've kind of started in the last couple of years, where we get the consultants to pass on their information on how to execute some of the work to government officials, so that we would have that capacity in country. It works as long as the staff remains the same, or we have lead back tools and manuals and so on. So it's one thing we've been trying. The other thing too is to try to involve the university. So we have the University of the West Indies and the staff at Lewis Community College. For some areas where we need that on the ground support, we are trying to work with students and researchers and assist us in filling some of the gaps that we have in our own ability to do research and data collection and so on.
Thank you, Janelle, for that contribution, and thank you to everybody who contributed. Our time is up. Oh, somebody is speaking now. Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Gustav
Lucia.
from St. Lucia. Great, thank you.
I just want to highlight that one element that we really focus on in St. Lucia is that of empowerment of communities to make those decisions in management. So in true Canary style, we facilitate the processes where these persons develop plans that are relevant to them. Forestry, sustainable development, and the other actors we rein in. But on another point, I want to highlight when I hear of technological having access to how was it stated, Helena?
In terms of, okay, the wording, in terms of capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication.
Technology transfer.
Right.
I want to highlight that, hold on. Yeah, technological, having access to technologies from the first world or developing countries is something we really have to consider in stating the agreements. Why? The NAFTA agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the US, one aspect which is not present in another agreement between the US and I think an Asian bloc of countries is that of technological transfer. In other words, just stating that, I think it gives it is onerous on the developed country or countries to share technologies that they've developed. So I just want to highlight this for consideration of the group as another element at a high level, at the level of diplomacy to factor in. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, St. Lucia. I appreciate that greatly. So we are at the end of the discussion period. I'm very grateful to all of you who voluntarily came in and made your contributions. Thank you so much. I now hand it back to Dr. Balakrishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Seren, and thanks to all the colleagues. A wealth of experience, a range of issues to be considered, to be addressed as we prepare, not just for the informal meeting of SBI 3 next week, but also to shape up the final version of the Global Biodiversity Framework and also looking at the implementation. And of course, as it was mentioned, that this particular discussion or this particular meeting is just to sort of provide you with some ideas in terms of what the agenda items are and what are the key issues that are relevant and important for the region, and how is that countries from the region and other stakeholder groups could engage with the process. But certainly, a few overarching issues or comments that have emerged during the discussions that definitely warrant some more thinking, some more follow-up, and also some more ideating in terms of as we prepare for both the working group meeting as well as the COP15. And of course, there were several mentions of the experiences of countries ranging from the issues of finance to capacity building, to dealing with the targets, the indicators that were used and the relevance of some of them at the national level, and how countries respond to some of these kinds of processes and targets set at the global level, the challenges in terms of realizing some of them over a period of time, and our own experiences of ensuring how we can make things better, but also understand the limitations or the challenges we have. But in terms of our inputs, I'm just, this being an informal session, because it's not a formal SBI meeting or a formal COP meeting, this is more an informal session to brainstorm, is that, in terms of the process, in terms of providing contributions to the informal meeting and also the formal SBI 3, when it is going to be held, and also the open working group on COP15. What would certainly help, given the wealth of experience, given the amount of expertise colleagues within this particular meeting has, and also your own colleagues back home in terms of working within the non-ministries and other departments, is to address a very, very simple question from an implementation viewpoint, is that if, for example, you are mandated to implement the framework as and when it is adopted, what is that we will do? What is it you will do differently? And why is it you have picked up that particular element of implementation action or an implementation structure or an implementation methodology that you feel is different? Because many times the discussions related to implementation is always seen as something that comes after a particular framework has been agreed, where we have already agreed for the goals, where we've agreed for the targets. But what would certainly help a lot of us think as elaborately as possible is that we have had the experience. We have been working on implementation of biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, access and benefit sharing related actions for many years. Not just since the adoption of the convention, but even before that. What the convention had provided us is a kind of a framework, and the protocols have also provided us a framework within which we are actually trying to address a lot of things where we have agreed on a multilateral basis. But certainly our experience of implementation and translating some of these at the global level to make them work at the national level definitely needs a little different kind of approach. It may need a different kind of an orientation in terms of identifying the entry points and also building on the strengths and also working on the weaknesses that we have. So if I'm going to be leaving some of you with a few, I would say, trigger questions, just for you to think. In terms of it, the following would be some of them. One, majority of the parties already have revised their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And as and when the GBF, the biodiversity framework, is going to be agreed, is it prudent that we wait for another 3 years or 4 years or 5 years before we will be re-revising the NBSAPs that reflects the priorities or the targets that are addressed within the GBF? That would be the starting point for implementation. And the reason I'm asking this question is that if you go that path, you already will be spending 5 years in identifying what is that we are going to do, and probably we only will have 5 years to do what we want to do. The second point is that in as much as these targets and the associated indicators are discussed and adopted at the global level, the relevance of many of them, and that is actually to an extent the beauty of Aichi biodiversity targets also, is that the Aichi biodiversity targets and the implementation frameworks provided a lot of opportunity for countries to come up with their own versions, their own ways of looking at addressing these targets and implementing actions to realize those targets. And that is why, if you look at the assessment of the Aichi biodiversity target related reports, you could easily pick up that there were close to 2,000 Aichi-like targets that are actually set by the countries. So the second point is that do we have to wait for the global biodiversity framework to be adopted and subsequently look at the implementation and indicator framework? Given our experiences that we already have, are we ready to start matching the draft targets with the interests and priorities of the countries where we come from? What our experiences of using the indicators for successes or failures could be. So is it time that we already start looking at it? Because that way we can, our contributions to the framework, our contributions to the implementation plan could be more important. The third point is that if there are any specific issues that we would like to follow up, or countries would like to follow up, not just within this discussion here today, but also the other regions as well, what are those? Because many times, we do have our inputs, we do have our comments, we do have our, commitments to translating some of these into action. But certainly, for various reasons, it's probably a little cruel to say that COVID has really helped us in one way, because it has actually given us more time in terms of discussing the targets, discussing the goals, and discussing the means of implementation. But certainly, can we make use of the time between now and COP15 to reassess on how we would like to look at specific issues that confront the region and confront the countries in terms of amending, in terms of suggesting language to the co-chairs, suggesting language to SBI and SBSTA for providing recommendation to COP and subsequent decision making at the COP level. And if that be the case, are there any few low-hanging fruit that stakeholder groups, when I say stakeholder groups, NGOs, civil society organizations, parties to the convention, the government agencies could certainly look at? And for example, as one example I mentioned, is that have we done an assessment of how much of money was available in the last 10 years for biodiversity conservation within the country, and how we have deployed that money and how effectively we have used the dollar that is provided to us in terms of conservation. And quick back of envelope calculation in itself could go a long way in trying to help us sit through the discussions in terms of financing, sit through the discussions in terms of effectiveness of the investments that needs to be made and things like that. I'm just sharing some of these points just for you to keep thinking about it, because of course, as I mentioned, that this meeting is only a kind of an opportunity that we are trying to make use of in light of the forthcoming informal meeting of SBI 3. But as the project that was mentioned by myself and Amrika, we actually are there to work with you, to help you, to support you, to define, to elaborate, to brainstorm, and to also come up with some very concrete and specific ideas that may be country specific, that may be group specific, or that may be region specific, that can provide as your contributions to the SBI, the Open Working Group meeting, and COP as well. So we are definitely available, and we welcome your interests and inputs into that. And please do get in touch with colleagues from CARICOM Secretariat in terms of any specific ideas you would like to have. And because this particular project or the program is just beginning and it still has a life of another 4 years to go, we definitely will be very keen to engage with you, not just in terms of preparing to deliver for COP, but more importantly, after COP in terms of implementation also. So whether you are interested in having a specific stakeholder meeting or a country-specific, discussion meeting on any of these topics or agenda items, feel free to let us know. And we certainly would benefit not just by working with you, but also enriching kind of an exchange of these ideas with the other regions as well. Because in a few hours from now, we are doing a similar kind of consultation with the Pacific region. We'll also do tomorrow evening a consultation with the Africa region in terms of also engaging with them, in terms of looking at what the agenda items are and how we can move some of these forward. And certainly the issues of cross-cutting nature, technology transfer, technology cooperation, capacity building, are very, very important issues. But to an extent, there are also issues that unfortunately many times do not get the attention that they need to get. And certainly if you look at the background documentation available for SBI as of today, we do have a full-fledged technology transfer mechanism, an institutional framework that is being suggested. So things are beginning to happen, and it is time that we review some of them and provide our inputs so that our interests are appropriately reflected in the final documentation, final decisions that come out of COP15. So with that, unless there are any general comments or inputs or questions to CARICOM Secretariat, to UNEP, and also to the facilitator, thanks a lot, Ms. Helena, you did a brilliant job. Please do raise your hand at this point. Otherwise, certainly a big thank you to all of you, colleagues from CARICOM Secretariat, colleagues from CBD Secretariat, essentially for your time, and also most importantly to Chair of SBI 3 for patiently sitting through this particular meeting and also making note of the discussions that actually have emerged from here and to my team at UNEP. So if you have any last minute interventions or comments, please do raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll give the floor to Ms. Tisha from CARICOM Secretariat for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Balakrishna. I guess certainly you have said quite a lot, and we are very happy and grateful for the many interventions that were done by our member states today. And it augurs well for our goal and what we aim to do under the third phase of the project through, under the CARICOM hub. We certainly do not wish to operate as usual, but ensure that what we do for the biodiversity cluster of MEAs is to add value and to support our member states as far as possible. So we remain available for sessions, informal like this, and we are available to discuss whether it be in groupings or bilateral. So please feel free to reach out. We want to thank you for your participation today and for sharing the useful information, and we continue to ensure that we engage with you at different levels to make sure that the region receives and benefits from those processes. And to thank you, Dr. Balakrishna, for the extensiveness of which you've taken the time to prepare the presentations and the agenda briefs. We encourage our participants, our members, is to review them, and we've done quite a bit of work. We also have the briefs from the thematic areas. We also have information shared and in this chat and others. Thank you to Helena. We very much appreciate the way in which you facilitated the discussions, and we look forward to continuing to work together in these forums and others. And special thanks to the team, Ladu and team from UNEP for continuing to support the Caribbean Hub as we continue to implement the ACP MEAs Phase 3 project. So thank you to America as well for remaining with us and continuing to support these processes, and for her usual interventions and knowledge sharing that we will certainly appreciate as we move forward. So with that being said, we look forward to continue these briefs and at different levels and continue to provide the support needed by our member states. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Tesha. And once again, thanks to the chair of SBI 3, secretary of SBI 3, Jyoti, colleague from CBD Secretariat, Ladu, Lemmy, and Rosemary from UNEP, and of course you, Tesha, Amrika, and Shune from CARICOM Secretariat, and Helena Brown, the bureau member from the region, for your help and support. And we look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you very much, and have a great day, have a good evening. Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Auntie.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.